Sheriff sold him a broken shack. Inside was a giant hanged woman. The sky bled red as the sun sank behind the canyons of Hollow Creek. The light stretched long across the ground, catching the edges of a ghost town that hadn't drawn a breath in 10 years. Dust hung thick enough to taste. Every window was broken. Every door hung open like a mouth mid-scream. A lone rider came slow through the main street, a rancher by the look of him. Dust on his hat, hunger in his eyes. His horse limped with exhaustion, and he carried nothing but a worn saddlebag and a dream smaller than his shadow. The sheriff was the only soul left standing when the rider came through. He leaned against the porch rail of the old jail, spitting tobacco into the wind and watching the stranger like a hawk sizing up its next meal. His badge was tarnished, his smile worse. "Looking for land?" the sheriff said. The rancher nodded. "Just somewhere to put up a roof." "Don't need much." The sheriff's grin widened, the kind a snake gives before the bite. "Got a shack out by the valley edge. Ain't much to look at, but the bones are good. Whole thing for $5. Hell, call it one if you're hard up." The rancher hesitated, suspicion flickering in his eyes. $1? That's a fool's price. Maybe, the sheriff drawled. Or maybe I'm just tired of seeing it rot. They shook hands. The sheriff's grip was too cold for the evening heat. By the time the rancher reached the edge of the valley, the sun was gone. The shack stood against the hills like a broken tooth, lopsided, split by years of wind and silence. The porch sagged under his boots. The door creaked when he pushed it open, the sound low and long, like something groaning from inside. He stepped in, lantern raised. The air was thick with rotten dust. Every board groaned under his weight, the sound echoing like a heartbeat in an empty chest. The rafters above disappeared into darkness, except for one thing, a rope swaying faintly in the breeze, sneaking through the cracks. When he lit the lantern fully, the light caught on something huge, a woman, hanging from the beam. Her body was massive, nearly scraping the floor, her hair gray and wild, her feet bare and caked in dried mud. The ceiling creaked under her weight, every sway making the rope whisper. The rancher froze. His breath caught somewhere between disbelief and horror. Her face was hidden beneath the shadows, but her hands hung low, enormous, rope burned, motionless. He took a slow step forward. The lantern flickered once, then twice, and then her fingers twitched. The rope creaked again, this time followed by a low sound, not the groan of wood, but of breath. She was alive. The lantern light shuddered as if frightened. Outside, the wind howled across Hollow Creek, carrying the echo of the sheriff's voice from miles away, a whisper swallowed by the storm. "Told you the price was fair, boy. Told you she comes with the place." The rope gave way with a dry snap, and the body hit the ground like thunder rolling through timber. Dust filled the shack, swallowing the lantern light. For a breath, the rancher thought he'd just released the dead, and then the woman coughed. A harsh, deep sound that clawed up from her lungs like gravel being turned in a shovel. She was alive. Somehow. Her frame was enormous, long arms, broad shoulders, a face that might have been beautiful once, before the years and the noose stole its softness. Her skin was as pale as lye, her eyes sunken hollows that flicked with faint, unsteady life. The rope had carved deep bruises into her neck, black and red like spilled ink. She tried to speak, but only a dry rattle came out. The rancher knelt beside her, heart pounding hard enough to feel it in his teeth. "Easy now," he muttered, voice rough with disbelief. "You're all right. You're all right." He wasn't sure if he meant it for her or himself. He grabbed his canteen and tilted it to her lips. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, darkening the dirt beneath her. Then her gaze met his, sharp, sudden, pleading, and for a second, he swore the world tilted. Something old moved behind those eyes, something that shouldn't still be there. Then came the sound of hooves. The rancher froze. A shadow filled the doorway, broad shoulders under a tan duster, a star badge glinting dull gold in the lantern light. "Evening." "Stranger," said the sheriff, voice like cold molasses. "Heard some commotion out this way. The rancher straightened, half blocking the woman with his body. She was hanging in here. Thought she was dead. The sheriff didn't look surprised. Didn't even blink. Was she? She ain't now. The lawman stepped inside, boots creaking slow on the warped boards. His hand rested casually on his belt, close to the revolver. You shouldn't have cut her down, he said. She ain't supposed to wake. That sent a chill through the rancher. Supposed to? The sheriff's eyes drifted to the fallen rope still swaying overhead. Some things on this land stay put for a reason. That woman's one of them. The rancher glanced back. She was trembling, eyes wide, barely breathing. She's alive, Sheriff. The man's jaw tightened, his gaze sliding toward the window. Alive ain't the same as belonging here. Some deaths don't die easy. The sheriff lingered a heartbeat longer, like he was tasting the air. Then he turned, hat brim low. You're new to these parts. I'll tell you this once. Leave her be. Don't feed her. Don't talk to her. And when she stops breathing again, you make damn sure she stays down. He walked out before the rancher could answer, his boots crunching through the dust, the sound fading into the night. The rancher stood there, lantern trembling in his grip. He turned back to the woman, still lying on the floorboards, whispering something too soft to hear. He barred the door behind him and threw another log onto the fire. The wood hissed and spat, lighting the room with jittery orange. The woman's breathing steadied, slow but strong. She wasn't sleeping, just watching the flames, eyes flicking with something unreadable. Outside, the wind began to howl across the plain. Then came a sound sharper, closer, like claws dragging down old planks. Scrape, stop, scrape again. The rancher grabbed his rifle and stepped toward the window. The night beyond was a void. Only the sound moved in it, circling the shack, patient, deliberate. He whispered to himself. Wasn't no animal. Behind him the fire popped. The woman stirred, lips moving in silence. When the wind died for a heartbeat, he heard her voice for the first time. Barely a whisper, but heavy as stone. He sold her soul. The rancher turned. What? But she had already drifted into uneasy sleep, her breath coming ragged in the flickering light. He sank into a chair beside the door, rifle across his lap. The sheriff's words echoed in his head, circling like the wind outside. Some things on this land stay put for a reason. He stared into the fire, jaw tight. Then I reckon I just bought myself a problem. The claws scraped once more, and the lantern shut it out. Dawn came gray and hollow over the valley, the kind of light that doesn't warm. It just reveals what survived the night. The fire in the stove had burned low to embers, and the shack smelled of damp wood, rope, and iron. The rancher sat near the doorway, hat low, rifle across his knees, half expecting the figure on the floor to vanish like a fever dream. But when she stirred, slow, deliberate, he realized she was real. Every breath she took rattled like chains dragged through dust. She sat up, her long hair falling forward in heavy ropes, her skin pale as river stone. When she finally spoke, her voice didn't match her face. It was deep, heavy, echoing with years of silence. I remember the sound first, she said. The rope creaking. The crowd breathing all at once. And then, nothing. The rancher didn't move. He just waited. Because something in her tone, calm, measured, almost formal, made him feel he was listening to testimony in a courtroom no one had ever left. They said I was too strong to be trusted, she continued, eyes fixed on the fire. Worked the railroads, hauled beams by hand, laughed louder than the men. They didn't like that. When the tunnel collapsed, they needed someone to blame. Sheriff made it easy. Said the earth caved because I disturbed the balance. That's what he called it. She turned, meeting his eyes for the first time. Her irises were pale gray, almost colorless, like smoke that forgot how to burn.
He hanged me himself.
Rope snapped. He said it was a sign the devil wanted me. So they buried me alive instead. The rancher shifted in his seat, fingers tightening on the rifle stock. And you dug your way out? She gave a slow nod. Took 3 days. I followed the wind when I couldn't breathe no more. When I finally clawed through, the town was gone. Not burned, just gone. Doors open, lamps cold. Like everybody left in one breath. The fire popped, and she flinched hard, then stilled again. Her eyes dropped to her wrists, where the rope burns were still dark, fresh despite the years. The rancher studied her in silence. He'd seen fear before, the kind that turns men small. But this woman wasn't afraid anymore. She was hollow in a way that made fear meaningless. He leaned forward, voice low. "You've been living here alone since?" "I don't live here," she said. "I just wait." Someone had to remember what they did. For a while, the only sound was the wind moaning through the broken boards. Then the rancher spoke again, more to the room than to her. "I lost my place back east. Spoke up for a ranch hand that didn't steal a thing. Sheriff there said I was soft. Took my land, took my wife, took everything but my boots." She looked at him, head tilting slightly. "And you came here to start again?" He gave a bitter chuckle. "That's what I thought. But it looks like peace died with the rest of this place." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened, just enough to show a flicker of understanding, or pity. "Peace don't die," she said quietly. "It just forgets your name for a while." The rancher stared into the fire, and for the first time since he'd bought the land, he didn't feel like the only living soul left in Hollow Creek. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, full of things neither could fix. He reached into his pack, pulled out a strip of jerky and handed it to her. She took it without hesitation, chewing, slow, thoughtful. "You should have left me up there," she said after a long while. "Maybe," he answered, voice rough. "But something tells me you're not the only one this town owes a reckoning." She met his gaze again, and for a brief second, the firelight flickered against her eyes like the glint of a badge. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a sound that didn't belong to nature. A faint jingle of metal, far off, like spurs walking in circles. The rancher reached for his rifle again. The woman didn't move. She just said, almost like a prayer, "He's coming back." The fire dimmed. The dawn bled into gray daylight, and both of them knew the past wasn't done yet. The sun crawled to its highest point, pouring molten gold through the cracks of the shack's broken roof. Inside, the rancher worked in silence, fixing the door hinge, checking the rifle's chamber, trying not to think about what he'd seen the night before. The woman slept fitfully in the corner, her breath shallow, her skin pale against the burlap blanket he'd wrapped her in. Every now and then she twitched, mumbling something he couldn't make out, a name maybe, or a prayer that had long stopped working. Hoofbeats cut through the heat. 3 of them. Slow, deliberate, the kind that didn't hurry because they didn't have to. The rancher froze, hand tightening around his rifle. Dust rolled past the window as 3 shadows grew longer outside the door. Then came the knock. 2 firm strikes of authority, not courtesy. The sheriff's voice seeped through the wood like smoke. "Afternoon, friend." "I reckon you found my little problem." The rancher didn't answer. He glanced at the back room. The woman was awake now, eyes wide, shaking her head in silence. He motioned for her to stay put and opened the door halfway. The sheriff sat astride a black mare, hat tilted low to block the glare. 2 deputies flanked him, boys with green eyes and itchy trigger fingers. The sheriff smiled thinly. "Forgot to mention," he said. "That shack you bought? Condemned, unsafe. Whole place is liable to fall in on itself. Best pack up and head on out." The rancher leaned on the doorframe, squinting at him. "Funny you didn't mention that when you sold it." "Yeah, well," the sheriff's grin widened. "Some truths don't come cheap." He swung down from the saddle, his boots sinking into the dry soil with a crunch. "Mind if I take a look inside?"
"Just to make sure you ain't hurt yourself poking where you shouldn't?"
The rancher hesitated. His heart thudded in his chest, but he stepped aside. The sheriff ducked in, taking in the small space, the repaired boards, the fire pit, the hanging beam above. His eyes lingered on the thick rope frayed clean through. The air in the room changed. He ran a gloved hand along the beam and let out a low whistle. "You cut her down, didn't you?" The rancher's stomach knotted. He didn't answer. The sheriff turned slowly, his gaze sharp and calm as a rattlesnake. "She ain't human, boy. She's the sin this town buried. You think you're helping her, but all you've done is dig up the grave we paid good sweat to fill." He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. "There are things out here that don't stay dead, 'cause the ground don't want 'em." Outside, one of the deputies shifted nervously. The other spat into the dirt and muttered, "Sun's dropping, Sheriff." The sheriff nodded once, tipping his hat. "You hear that?" "Sun's getting low." He turned back to the rancher, voice dripping with menace. "When it sets, I'm coming back to finish what should have stayed dead." He paused at the threshold, hand on the doorframe, eyes glinting like cold iron. "You can leave before then, or you can stay and watch what happens when a man don't know his place." Then he was gone. The door swung shut behind him, and the sound of hooves faded into the distance. The rancher stood still, breath shaking. Behind him, the woman whispered from the shadows, "He'll come for me." The rancher glanced toward the dying sun leaking through the cracks. "Then he'll find someone waiting." The wind picked up, howling through the broken walls like a warning that the land itself was listening. The sun sank slow and swollen behind the ridge, painting the horizon the color of dried blood. The wind began to shift, not gentle anymore, but sharp and cutting, crawling through the cracks of the old shack like a whisper that wanted in. The rancher moved methodically, his hands blackened with dust and splinters. He hammered the last board across the window and tested it with his shoulder until it held. Each strike echoed through the empty valley like a heartbeat, counting down to nightfall. The woman watched from the doorway, her massive frame hunched, breath shallow but steady. Her pale skin gleamed faintly in the dying light, every bruise and rope burn catching the fire's glow like old scars carved by time itself. He spoke without looking at her. "They'll be back before moonrise." She didn't flinch. "They always come back." She moved slowly but with purpose, dragging an old workbench against the wall, propping it beneath the door latch. Her hands trembled, but her will didn't. She found an iron bar among the ruins of the hearth and began to twist it, shaping it into something sharp. The sound of bending metal filled the silence, more defiant than any prayer. Outside, the coyotes had begun their chorus, long hollow cries that rose and fell with the wind. It wasn't hunger in their howls, it was warning. The rancher rummaged through a half-collapsed trunk, finding a few bent nails, an oil lantern, and a handful of cartridges that had seen better days. He spread them on the table, counting each one under his breath like a priest measuring out sins. "Ain't much," he muttered, "but maybe enough to buy a few more breaths." He turned to her. "You ever handled a rifle?" She straightened, towering even in her weakness. "I've handled worse." He pressed the Winchester into her hands anyway, showing her how to hold it steady, how to brace the recoil against her shoulder. Her grip was clumsy at first, but her eyes, calm, focused, never wavered. When he tried to teach her how to load it, she shook her head. "I don't need guns," she said quietly. "I just need the truth to stand." The words hung heavy between them. The rancher didn't answer. He simply nodded once, understanding that her fight wasn't about survival. It was about setting something right, about facing what had buried her and saying, "No more." He dragged a chair to the center of the room and sat facing the door, rifle across his knees. The woman leaned against the wall beside him, the firelight throwing their shadows long and defiant across the floorboards. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying with it the distant clatter of hooves. The rancher drew a slow breath. "Night's coming," he said. The woman looked toward the window, where the last thread of daylight vanished into red dust. "It never really left," she whispered, and then the first thunder rolled across the valley. Deep and distant, the sound of the reckoning drawing near. The moon rose red that night, swollen, bleeding light over the valley like the sky itself was warning them. The air had turned heavy, thick enough to taste. Every gust of wind carried dust and the faint smell of blood. The rancher stood in the doorway of the shack, lantern burning low beside him, rifle steady in his hands. The woman sat silent behind him, her shadow stretching long across the dirt floor. Outside, the sound of hooves grew louder, a slow, deliberate drumbeat against the earth. He whispered, almost to himself, "Guess the sheriff keeps his word after all." From the ridge came a flicker of torchlight, then another, then a dozen more. The riders fanned out like wolves circling their kill, their shadows long and crooked under that crimson moon. The sheriff rode at the front, his horse black as coal, a broad wagon dragging behind, and in it an old gallows beam, split and scarred from years of death. The rancher's jaw clenched. The woman rose, towering even as she trembled. Her rope scar glowed faintly in the firelight, the mark of what had been done to her. The sheriff's voice boomed across the empty plain. "Town wants justice," he said. "Same justice we gave her before you meddled." He spat in the dirt. "She's a curse. You brought her back." The rancher lifted his rifle, sight steady. "Justice? You mean murder wrapped in law?" The sheriff grinned, yellow teeth in the dark. "Ain't much difference out here." Then the first shot cracked. The rancher dove behind a support beam as splinters exploded around him. The shack shuddered with each impact, old boards groaning under the assault. The woman ducked low, covering her head as bullets tore through the roof. She reached for a rusted shovel and pressed it into his hands. No words, just the silent trust of two people who'd run out of choices. Outside, the deputies fanned out, shouting over the wind. The sheriff dismounted, revolver drawn, his badge flashing like a cold star in the firelight. "Burn the place," he barked. "Let the devils roast." Flaming torches hit the walls. The dry wood caught like kindling, flames crawling up fast, hungry. The rancher fired back through the window. One shot, clean. A deputy dropped, clutching his chest. Another fell when the woman, with impossible strength, hurled a broken door hinge straight into his skull. But there were too many. Smoke filled the room. The fire roared, orange tongues licking the ceiling. The rancher turned. "We have to move." Before he could finish, the front door burst open. The sheriff stood framed in the inferno, hat low, eyes black as pitch. Rain began to fall, hissing against the flames, but it didn't slow him down. The woman stepped forward, taller now, her face half shadow, half light. "You hanged me once," she said softly. "You buried me next, but you never broke me." The sheriff's hand didn't shake as he leveled his revolver at her chest. "Then let's finish it proper this time." The gun went off. The shot echoed like thunder. She staggered back but didn't fall. The hole in her chest smoked, bloodless, as she lifted her head. Her eyes burned, not red, not white, something in between. The deputies froze, their courage evaporating. "You buried me," she said, voice rising, deep and thunderous. "To bury your lies, your crimes, your cowardice." The sheriff stepped back, panic finally cracking through his mask. "You're not real," he stammered. "You're—" She moved. With one stride, she closed the distance and seized him by the throat. His feet left the ground, boots kicking uselessly. The rain came harder now, pelting both of them, washing ash into mud. Lightning flashed, bright, cold, merciless. She held him there, inches from her face. "Do you feel it?" she growled. "That's the weight of every life you took for your law." He gasped, reaching for his belt, the glint of a knife. He slashed wildly, cutting into her shoulder. She didn't flinch. "I gave this town its peace," he choked. "I saved them." "You saved yourself," she said. "And you damned everyone else." She hurled him across the yard with a roar that shook the ground. His body slammed against the gallows beam in the wagon, the same one that once held her. The old wood cracked, split in two, and collapsed under his weight. The sound echoed like judgment. Rain poured down in sheets, killing the flames, washing smoke and soot away. The deputies bolted into the darkness, their torches snuffed out by wind and terror. The rancher stepped from the ruins of the shack, rifle lowered. The sheriff lay broken, eyes staring up into the storm. She stood over him, breathing hard. Her chest wound glowed faintly, not blood, but light seeping out. She knelt beside him, placed a hand over his badge, and whispered, "Your justice is done." Then she looked up at the rancher, her expression unreadable. "It's over," she said. He nodded, voice low. "Yeah, but it'll never be forgotten." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm raged around them, tearing through the valley as if trying to cleanse it. The wind howled. The rain flooded trenches and washed away the sheriff's footprints. When the thunder finally faded, only the two of them remained, the broken beam between them, the lawman's body buried under its weight. The rancher dropped his rifle. The woman straightened, taller and steadier now, rainwater streaming off her like baptism. The rope burns around her neck glistened silver. No longer wounds but scars, proof of endurance. The red moon slipped behind clouds. The sky cracked open with white lightning one last time, and the valley lit up, every grave, every cross, every ghosted piece of timber revealed in that blinding flash. Then, silence. The rancher spoke first, barely above a whisper. Maybe the land can rest now. She looked toward the horizon, where dawn was fighting to break through. No, she said softly, but it can heal. And with that, she turned from the gallows and began walking into the storm. He watched her go, the towering figure fading into the curtain of rain until she became nothing but shadow and light. The rancher stood alone, soaked and shaking, the remnants of the gallows creaking behind him. The fire was gone, the lawman dead, the curse burned clean from the earth. He lifted his face to the sky, let the rain wash the soot from his skin, and whispered to no one. She finally stood taller than the rope. Lightning flashed once more, far off in the distance as if answering. Then the storm began to quiet, and the night gave way to pale morning. The storm had burned itself out by dawn. All that was left was silence, deep, wide, and wet as the valley itself. The air hung heavy with the scent of rain and blood. The shack, half collapsed and smoldering, leaned under the gray morning like an old sinner begging forgiveness. Steam rose off the soaked dirt where fire and fury had ruled just hours before. The rancher stood ankle-deep in mud, his hat gone, his coat torn to ribbons. He looked older, like a man who had outlived his own sins. His rifle lay in the muck beside him, useless now. All that moved was the rain, whispering against the broken roof, hissing on the ashes of the gallows beam that had snapped in the night. A few yards away, she sat on a stump, the giant woman, pale and scarred, her skin streaked with soot but her eyes clear. She wasn't bound anymore. The rope that had once been her noose hung limp across her lap, soaked and frayed. Her gaze was fixed on the shattered remains of the gallows. Every drop of rain washed a little more blood away from the earth until nothing red was left, only the bare, clean color of wood and dirt. The rancher knelt beside the sheriff's body lying face up in the mud. His badge had fallen beside him, bent and blackened by lightning. The man's eyes were open, cold, accusing, as if even death couldn't humble him. The rancher stared down at him for a long while. Then, without a word, he took off his own badge, rusted and dented, and placed it on the sheriff's chest. Now the town's got a law it can finally trust, he murmured. He dug the grave himself, hands blistering in the wet clay. No prayers, no words, just the steady rhythm of the shovel. The woman watched him work in silence. When the last clump of dirt fell, the storm seemed to ease, like the valley itself had taken a long, tired breath. When he was done, he leaned on the shovel and looked toward her. "You don't have to go," he said softly. "Could stay. Help me fix this place. Build it back." For the first time since the gallows broke, she smiled. A faint, crooked smile, more sorrow than joy. "This land don't need more building," she said. "It needs rest." She rose to her full height, water dripping from her shoulders like dew off granite. In the cold morning light, she didn't look monstrous anymore, just tired, human, and free. The rancher called after her as she started walking toward the horizon. "Where will you go?" She stopped just once, her back to him, rain beading in her hair. "Where the rope can't reach," she said. The rancher didn't answer. He just stood there, hat pressed to his chest, watching her walk into the dawn. Each step she took sank deep into the softened ground. But the earth didn't resist her anymore. It gave way easy, like it was glad to have her back. The rain thickened for a moment, a soft, forgiving downpour that blurred the world into silver light. When it stopped, she was gone. He looked up at the sky. No thunder, no clouds, just the slow, bright spread of morning. The valley smelled clean again, washed of ghosts. The shack creaked in the wind, but it didn't sound cursed anymore. It sounded alive. The rancher turned his back to the grave and walked toward it, shoulders square, boots sinking deep. He picked up the rope she had left behind and tossed it into the fire pit. It hissed as it burned, a soft, final sigh. As the last ember faded, the narrator's voice would echo low and steady. In the West, mercy ain't weakness. It's the hardest thing a man can give, especially to himself. He looked once more toward the horizon. And for the first time, he didn't see a curse on that land. He saw the chance to start again. The rain began to fall once more, gentle, clean, and endless. The sound of it carried far across the valley, washing away every name carved into the dirt. What about you, folks? Would you have cut her down? The storm had passed, but the valley still whispered. Rain slid down the splintered wood of the old shack, washing blood and dust into the thirsty soil. The wind carried the scent of smoke and pine, blending into that strange stillness that only follows justice long delayed. In the West, justice came slow, sometimes too late, sometimes too hard. But when truth finally stands tall, even the rope bows to it. Thunder rolls low in the distance, fading into a dawn that glows across the ruined shack and the unmarked grave beside it. The land, quiet now, seems to breathe again. Tell me, folks, would you have cut her down? If this tale spoke to you, ride with us again. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories the West tried to bury but couldn't.